and welcome to another in our funding series looking at how you can find finance and not be afraid of funding when it comes to starting a business. And today I am joined by Phil Archer from D&T. Hi Phil, it's lovely to have you with us.
Good morning. Hello, Steph. It's lovely to see you.
So do you want to explain a little bit about who D&T are?
Yes, D&T is a chartered accountancy practice. We've been around in various guises for, I think, the best part of 30 years. And probably for the majority of the last 18 years or so, we've been particularly involved in the franchise sector. We call ourselves the leading franchise sector network accountants. Nobody's challenged us yet on that, so I think that's reasonably true. And we deal with, we've probably got a couple of hundred franchisors that we touch base with on a regular basis, and something like 2,300 SMEs that we are the accountants for.
So you've obviously got a lot of experience when it comes to women starting a business or working in the franchise sector. So what advice would you give to women about how they can review their personal financial situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of interesting ways of looking at things like this, and we quite often find that when you're talking to one or other, it doesn't actually matter whether it's a male or a female. We often have to have a discussion about whether they are with partners or without partners, or what their personal circumstances are at home. And it's not because, of any particular reason that we need to know that, has a woman got a partner. It's not that at all the other way around. It's because it actually makes quite a difference when we start looking at funding options, the business planning process. Is the person going to be doing it on their own? Is that partner available to potentially be, and this works both ways, is that going to be potentially helpful to have them involved in the business, even as just a shareholder or a director? Silent partners, non-silent partners. It is quite important that we get right into the detail of the circumstances behind the person who's applying, whether it's male or female. It doesn't really matter.
So is there anything that a woman can do to help that process, to maybe prepare some detail in terms of her accounts and her budget through the month?
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing your own budgets for the business, then you've obviously got to think through all your different cost elements, your revenue lines, your cost of sales, and start to get your head around your business model and how it's going to work, how you're going to market, and then how, going forward, what your aspirations are. One of the things that I find quite remarkable sometimes is I start talking to people and they still haven't done a household budget. And it surprises me that you're going off to go and run a business and you haven't done a household budget. Well, the household budget is so important because it tells you what your survival costs are and what you need. And you can then start to talk a little bit more soundly about the finances of the business, because you know what you've got to get to and what you need to draw to actually, one, live, but two, the aspirational level that you want. And the second part of this is you still need that when you go to the banks and the finance companies, because they want to check that your business projections aren't too low or aren't too high, because they have to follow a policy called responsible lending. And if you're not going to have a project that's going to pay you enough to live on, then that's not responsible lending and they can't lend to you. So real key one for me, and doesn't surprise, and it never stops surprising me that people haven't done it, is sort your household budget out. Make sure you know what you're paying a month.
So that's obviously quite a big area, and research has shown that women tend to shy away from finances. It's kind of something that they don't fully understand. So in terms of creating a household budget, what's the basics that you would advise that they would incorporate into that?
A really easy starting point is to just get your last month's current account statement, and then basically just go through every line on that current account statement and take out the stuff that's spontaneous purchases, one-offs, and just look at all the regular stuff. And it's usually quite easy to spot because they're normally all on the first of the month. And it's usually all labeled direct debit or something like that. And basically just list that out. Now, we've got a very simple little one-page Excel thing that we can send out to anybody, unbranded. Just use it. It's and it has the mortgage, the rent, if you're a tenant, it has a council tax or utilities. Something that people quite often forget is spending money. They'll put down what is actually going out and not realize that spending money does need to be budgeted in a household budget. Nobody expects you to do 100% of your life doing the job. You've got to have some downtime. And even if you do peg that back a little bit, you still need a line for that. Quite often we see childcare costs going in there as quite an important one. Gym memberships, car insurance, fuel, and I'm going to say it, clothing allowances normally very important. But to be fair, the chaps seem to have bigger ones than the girls, so it is the way it is. So
that's quite surprising.
No, it's reasonably true.
And in terms of improving our suitability for starting a business, what would you suggest for someone who is looking to start a business that she can do to improve that?
I think making sure your CV is up to date, and I guess we've got to talk about this. You could find that a lady going into business may have had a career break, for any number of reasons, but usually a child thing. And it's important that you do put that on there, and the gap, and so that people can see what you were doing in a gap. And I get it, with other people as well, where you maybe have a few months off and you don't do something. It's good to just sort of explain that on your CV. But when you're doing the CV, it's talk a little bit more about your attributes rather than your actual jobs. So make sure at the top of your CV you've got sort of a personal statement about who you are, what you're trying to achieve, the type of person you are, and your key skills. I mean, if you've got a bunch of key skills, these are the things that particularly franchisors want to see, because the strengths, as we know with franchising, is you don't have to have prior experience in that particular industry sector. But what you do need to have is transportable skills that the franchisor knows they can work with. And that's how I would do it. I would make sure that you project yourself really well in that top half of your CV. The rest, crikey, by the time you get to the second page, nobody reads it anyway. So
yeah, that's true. And my final question, Phil, how can anyone, but particularly women, if they've been on a career break or they're looking to change career and they want to run a business, how can they assess whether they really can afford to start and run a business?
Okay, that is quite a tricky question. It will all depend on what size of business you're trying to start. There are a number of schemes out there if you're starting a very small scale business. There's something called a startup loan scheme, which I'm sure a lot of people already have heard of. That works really well in those circumstances. There's not really too much guidance around how much you need to invest and how much you can get from a startup loan in relation to that. But generally, you can't do 100% funding. So you will need something to invest. As soon as you move up a notch and you're sort of looking at slightly bigger opportunities, slightly bigger project sizes, you might be looking at a bank type solution for the funding. The banks all run lending policies on all the brands that they know. If they don't know a brand, the lending policies are usually 50-50, which means you'd need 50% of the investment and the bank will come to the party with 50% of the investment. Some of the more established brands are up to 60-40 and 70-30. Which is great. You have £100,000 project, 30 grand from you, 70 from the bank. So it's got to be worth talking to an independent advisor at that point. There are a few affiliates associated with the BFA that can do this, obviously us, and we can advise depending on what the project size is, what the franchise is, talk to you about your personal circumstances and just work out the viability for you.
That's been really interesting and really helpful. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate your time. If you ladies would like any further information, then pop a comment below or send us an email. If you want that budget sheet that Phil mentioned, then again, let us know and we can arrange for that to be sent out to you. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Phil.
Lovely. Thank you.